The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers as my sister Stephanie screamed across her wedding reception. "Why are you even here? You're embarrassing me in front of everyone." Her voice cut through the elegant ballroom like shattered crystal. I stood frozen in my simple black dress, watching 300 guests turn to stare at the family outcast. What Stephanie didn't know was that her new groom had just recognized me from classified military files. What none of them knew was that I'd saved his entire unit in Afghanistan 2 years ago. I had driven 4 hours from my tiny studio apartment in Richmond to attend what my sister called the social event of the decade. The invitation arrived 3 weeks earlier, addressed in Stephanie's perfect calligraphy, with no personal note inside. Just the formal request for my presence at Willowbrook Country Club, one of Virginia's most prestigious venues. Standing in front of my cramped bathroom mirror that morning, I'd practiced introducing myself to relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. I'd saved for months to buy the simple black cocktail dress hanging on my closet door, hoping it would help me blend into a crowd that had made it clear I didn't belong. The drive through Virginia's rolling countryside gave me too much time to think. Maple trees lined the highway in their autumn glory, their leaves painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. I kept rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining scenarios where my family might finally accept me back into their circle of warmth and approval. Willowbrook Country Club exceeded every expectation I'd built during the lonely drive. The sprawling estate featured manicured gardens, fountains that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, and a main building that looked like something from a Southern Belle's dream. Luxury cars filled the circular driveway while uniformed valets directed traffic with military precision. Walking through the mahogany doors, I immediately noticed the abundance of dress uniforms among the guests. Navy blue, army green, and Air Force dress blues created a sea of military formality throughout the marble-floored lobby. Stephanie had mentioned that Captain Daniel Morrison came from a distinguished military family, but seeing the assembled officers made me realize just how prestigious this union truly was. The ceremony itself unfolded like a fairy tale. Stephanie glided down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than my annual rent, her blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo, decorated with pearls and baby's breath. She looked absolutely radiant as she approached her groom, a handsome captain whose dress uniform displayed ribbons and medals that spoke of serious military service. I sat in the back row watching my parents beam with pride from their front row seats. My mother, Patricia, wore a lavender silk dress that complemented her silver hair, while my father stood tall in his best civilian suit, his own military bearing still evident despite his retirement years earlier. Neither had acknowledged my presence beyond Patricia's cool nod when I entered the chapel. During the reception cocktail hour, I found myself gravitating toward the least populated corner of the ballroom, nursing a glass of champagne and observing the celebration from a safe distance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across tables, draped in ivory linens, while floral centerpieces filled the air with the scent of roses and gardenias. Military families dominated the guest list, their conversations peppered with references to deployments, base assignments, and shared experiences in foreign theaters. I recognized the camaraderie immediately, though I kept my own service background carefully hidden as I'd learned to do in civilian settings. Stephanie held court near the head table, accepting congratulations and praise for the elaborate wedding she'd planned down to the smallest detail. Her laughter rang across the room as she described the honeymoon cruise through the Mediterranean, the new house they'd purchased near Daniel's Base, and their plans for starting a family within the year. The formal dinner began with military precision. Servers in crisp white uniforms delivered course after course of gourmet cuisine, while a string quartet provided elegant background music. I sat alone at a table in the back, watching my extended family celebrate without including me in their joyful conversations. Aunts and uncles who had helped raise me during childhood summers now looked through me as if I were invisible. Cousins who once considered me their adventurous role model avoided eye contact when they passed my table. The isolation felt heavier with each passing hour weighing on my chest like a stone. When Stephanie rose to address her guests, her happiness radiated across the entire ballroom. She thanked her parents for their support, praised Daniel's family for welcoming her with open arms, and expressed gratitude to everyone who had traveled to share their special day. Her eyes swept across the room, lingering on family members and close friends, but skipping over my corner entirely. The speeches continued with heartfelt toasts from both families. General Morrison himself stood to welcome Stephanie into their military family, praising her strength and dedication as qualities essential for a military wife. His words carried the authority of a man accustomed to command, and every guest hung on his observations about duty, honor, and commitment. As dessert was served, I noticed several guests glancing in my direction with curiosity rather than warmth. Whispered conversations seemed to involve speculation about the solitary young woman sitting apart from the celebration. The attention made my skin prickle with discomfort, and I began planning my exit strategy. Then Stephanie's voice cut across the ballroom like a blade. "Why are you even here?" she demanded, marching toward my table with fury blazing in her eyes. "You're embarrassing me in front of everyone. This is my wedding and you're sitting there like some kind of charity case." The string quartet stopped playing. Conversations died mid-sentence. 300 pairs of eyes turned to witness the bride publicly humiliating her own sister at what should have been the happiest moment of her life. Heat flooded my cheeks as I realized that every person in that elegant ballroom was now staring at the family scandal. Military officers raised their eyebrows in disapproval of such behavior, while civilian guests leaned forward to catch every word of the drama unfolding before them. "Stephanie, please," I whispered, hoping to diffuse the situation before it escalated further. "Please nothing." She snapped her voice, carrying clearly across the silent room. "You show up uninvited wearing some discount store dress, making everyone uncomfortable with your presence. Why can't you just leave me alone?" My heart shattered as her words confirmed every fear I'd carried during the long drive to Willowbrook. Despite the formal invitation in my purse, despite my careful preparation and hopeful expectations, I remained the unwanted daughter, the disappointing sister, the family member they'd rather forget. Just as I reached for my purse to leave, Captain Daniel Morrison appeared beside my table. His face had gone completely white, and he was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite identify, recognition mixed with something that looked almost like fear. "You're Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell." Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible above the stunned silence filling the ballroom. "The ghost of Kandahar." My blood turned to ice. That codename belonged to a classified world I'd left behind, a shadow identity, known only to military intelligence and the soldiers whose lives had depended on operations most people would never learn about. Daniel's hands shook as he gripped the back of an empty chair. "My God, you're really here. You're Stephanie's sister." The irony struck me like physical blow. For 2 years, I'd lived quietly in Richmond, working part-time jobs and attending community college classes, while my family assumed I was drifting through life without purpose or direction. None of them knew that I'd spent 3 tours in Afghanistan conducting operations that saved American lives and disrupted enemy networks. Captain Morrison. I said carefully, using his rank to maintain proper military protocol. "I think you might have me confused with someone else." "No confusion, ma'am." His voice grew stronger, filled with the certainty of a soldier who had memorized every detail of a life-saving mission. "Operation Silent Thunder, Kandahar Province, 2 years ago." The memories flooded back despite my efforts to keep them buried. The desperate radio transmission that had awakened me at 0200 hours. 47 soldiers trapped behind enemy lines with Taliban forces closing in from 3 directions. Intelligence indicating that rescue attempts would result in catastrophic casualties. I had volunteered for the solo infiltration mission that military commanders considered nearly impossible. While conventional forces created diversions 50 kilometers away, I'd slipped through enemy territory disguised as a local merchant, carrying intelligence-gathering equipment hidden beneath traditional Afghan clothing. For 36 hours, I'd moved through Taliban-controlled villages, intercepting communications, mapping enemy positions, and identifying weak points in their siege formation. The information I gathered allowed our forces to coordinate a precision rescue that extracted every trapped soldier without a single American casualty. Daniel's unit had been among those rescued. We were pinned down in that compound for a day and a half. He continued, his voice growing emotional. No water-limited ammunition, watching Taliban fighters position themselves for what we knew would be our final assault. Command told us to prepare for the worst. Stephanie stood frozen beside us, her wedding dress seeming suddenly out of place, in a conversation about life and death in a war zone thousands of miles away. Other guests began moving closer, drawn by the intensity of Daniel's words and my obvious discomfort with his revelations. Then everything changed. Daniel said, his eyes never leaving my face. Suddenly, Command had perfect intelligence about enemy positions, communication frequencies, supply routes. They coordinated an extraction so precise it looked like magic. 47 of us walked out of there alive because someone had gathered information no conventional unit could have obtained. My throat tightened as I remembered the personal cost of that mission. The infected wound from crawling through drainage ditches, the dehydration from 3 days with minimal water, the nightmares that still woke me some nights filled with the faces of enemy fighters I'd observed through binoculars. We never learned the operative's real name, Daniel continued. Just the code name Ghost of Kandahar. But my father spent months trying to identify the person who saved his son's life. When military intelligence finally released your photograph 6 months ago, he nearly broke down crying. The ballroom felt like it was spinning around me. My carefully constructed civilian life was colliding with the military world I'd tried so hard to leave behind. Stephanie's public humiliation suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the much larger revelation unfolding in front of 300 wedding guests. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" Stephanie demanded, her voice shrill with confusion and growing anger. "She's nobody. She's my failure sister who can't hold a job or finish college." The dismissive words cut deep, especially coming at a moment when my actual achievements were being recognized by someone who understood their true significance. For years, I'd endured my family's disappointment while carrying secrets about service they couldn't comprehend. Daniel turned to face his new wife, his expression a mixture of disbelief and barely controlled anger. "Stephanie, this woman saved my life. She saved 46 other American soldiers. She's a decorated war hero." "That's impossible," Stephanie protested, but uncertainty crept into her voice as she looked between Daniel's passionate certainty and my obvious discomfort. "She never served in the military. She never did anything important." The pain in her words revealed how completely my family had misunderstood my absence during those crucial years. They'd assumed I was avoiding responsibility while I was actually serving in classified operations that required absolute secrecy about my identity and activities. Daniel's face hardened with determination. "My father needs to know you're here. General Morrison has been searching for you ever since he learned your identity. He calls you the guardian angel who brought his son home." Panic fluttered in my chest. General Morrison commanded respect throughout the military hierarchy, and his presence at this wedding suddenly took on much greater significance. I'd hoped to remain anonymous to attend Stephanie's celebration and slip away without disrupting anyone's life. "Please don't," I whispered. But Daniel was already moving toward the head table where his father sat in conversation with other senior officers. Military families throughout the ballroom had begun to notice the commotion at my table. Conversation stopped as officers and their spouses turned their attention toward the developing situation. The formal elegance of the wedding reception was transforming into something much more serious. Stephanie grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. What is he talking about? What haven't you told us? Before I could answer, Daniel reached his father's table and began speaking in urgent, hushed tones. I watched General Morrison's expression change from mild curiosity to sharp attention as his son pointed in my direction. The decorated general's fork clattered against his plate as recognition dawned in his eyes. The moment stretched like eternity as General Morrison rose from his chair, his gaze locked on my face across the crowded ballroom. Every instinct told me to flee to escape before this private moment became a public spectacle. But military training had taught me to face difficult situations with dignity, even when every fiber of my being wanted to run. General Morrison stood with the bearing of a man who had commanded troops in the world's most dangerous theaters. His dress uniform displayed ribbons and medals accumulated over 3 decades of distinguished service, including deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and classified operations that had shaped modern military strategy. As he scanned the ballroom, military guests instinctively straightened in their chairs. The general's reputation preceded him wherever he went. Stories of his tactical brilliance, personal courage, and unwavering dedication to his soldiers had become legend throughout the armed forces. His eyes found mine across the room, and I saw recognition dawn with devastating clarity. This was the moment I dreaded for 2 years, when my carefully maintained anonymity would shatter under the weight of military protocol and personal gratitude. General Morrison had spent countless hours investigating Operation Silent Thunder after learning that his son's life hung in the balance during those 36 desperate hours. The classified nature of intelligence operations meant that details emerged slowly through careful channels and redacted reports that protected operative identities. For months, he'd known only that a single intelligence officer had conducted the solo mission that provided information crucial to the rescue operation. Military bureaucracy had classified my identity so deeply that even a 3-star general struggled to penetrate the layers of secrecy surrounding special operations personnel. The breakthrough came when operational security protocols were finally relaxed 6 months after the mission. General Morrison received a photograph and basic service record that revealed the face behind the codename Ghost of Kandahar. He'd carried that photograph in his uniform pocket ever since, hoping for an opportunity to personally thank the operative who had brought his son home alive. Now that operative sat at a corner table in his family's wedding celebration, having been publicly humiliated by a bride who had no understanding of her sister's extraordinary sacrifice and courage. Military guests throughout the ballroom began to sense the significance of the moment unfolding before them. Conversations died as officers noticed General Morrison's intense focus on a civilian woman sitting alone. The atmosphere shifted from festive celebration to something approaching military ceremony. Stephanie still gripped my arm, her confusion mounting as she watched her new father-in-law's dramatic reaction to my presence. "Why is he looking at you like that?" she hissed, her wedding day spinning beyond her control. Other family members had begun to notice the disturbance as well. My parents exchanged worried glances from their positions near the head table, while aunts and uncles whispered among themselves about the strange scene developing in their corner of the reception. General Morrison began walking across the ballroom floor with measured, purposeful steps. Military guests rose instinctively as he passed their tables, recognizing the formal nature of his approach. The string quartet had long since stopped playing, leaving only the sound of his polished dress shoes clicking against marble. Conversations throughout the ballroom faded to whispers, then to complete silence, as 300 guests sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary. The elegant reception had transformed into an arena where military honor was about to intersect with family dysfunction in ways none of them could have anticipated. I felt exposed under the weight of so many stares, my simple black dress suddenly feeling inadequate for the attention it was receiving. Years of intelligence training had taught me to blend into crowds, to remain forgettable in social settings. This level of scrutiny violated every instinct I'd developed about personal security and anonymity. My mother, Patricia, had risen from her chair, her face pale with confusion and growing alarm. She'd spent years disappointed in what she perceived as my lack of direction and achievement. The idea that her failure daughter might be connected to military operations beyond her comprehension challenged everything she believed about our family dynamic. General Morrison stopped 3 feet from my table, his posture shifting into formal military bearing that commanded instant respect from everyone in the ballroom. His eyes met mine with intensity that seemed to peer straight into my soul, seeking confirmation of what his military records had already told him. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, "are you Lieutenant Colonel Amalia Hartwell, formerly of the 715th Military Intelligence Battalion?" The formal use of my rank and unit designation sent shockwaves through my family members who had never heard those words before. Stephanie's grip on my arm loosened as the reality of Daniel's claims began to sink in. Military guests throughout the ballroom had begun standing, recognizing the significance of General Morrison's formal address. Officers who moments earlier had been enjoying wedding cake now stood at attention, understanding that they were witnessing the recognition of exceptional service. I rose slowly, my civilian clothes feeling suddenly inappropriate for military protocol. "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice barely audible, but carrying the crisp pronunciation that marked years of military training. General Morrison snapped to attention with precision that would have impressed drill sergeants at West Point. His right hand rose in the sharpest military salute I had ever received, held with unwavering steadiness that communicated profound respect and gratitude. "Ma'am, it is my highest honor to stand in your presence." The ballroom erupted in a way that transformed Stephanie's elegant wedding reception into something resembling a military ceremony. General Morrison's salute triggered an immediate response from every service member present, creating a sea of dress uniforms, snapping to attention throughout the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Morrison announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing large formations, "I present Lieutenant Colonel Amalia Hartwell, a true American hero." My legs felt weak as 300 pairs of eyes focused on me with newfound respect and curiosity. The woman who had been publicly humiliated minutes earlier was suddenly the center of attention for entirely different reasons. General Morrison lowered his salute but maintained his formal bearing as he began to address the assembled guests. 2 years ago, this remarkable officer single-handedly conducted one of the most daring intelligence operations in recent military history, Operation Silent Thunder in Afghanistan's Kandahar province. Military guests nodded with recognition, understanding immediately the significance of special operations conducted in one of the war's most dangerous theaters. Civilian guests leaned forward, captivated by the revelation that someone they dismissed as unimportant had participated in actual combat operations. 47 American soldiers, including my own son, were trapped behind enemy lines for 36 hours. The general continued, his voice thick with emotion. Taliban forces had surrounded their position with overwhelming numbers. Conventional rescue attempts would have resulted in catastrophic casualties. I watched my family's faces transform as they absorbed information that contradicted everything they believed about my capabilities and character. My mother's hand covered her mouth in shock, while my father's military background helped him understand the gravity of what he was hearing. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell volunteered for a solo infiltration mission that senior commanders considered nearly impossible. General Morrison continued. She spent 3 days moving through enemy territory, gathering intelligence that allowed our forces to coordinate a precision rescue operation. Stephanie stood frozen beside me, her wedding dress seeming absurdly out of place amid discussions of warfare and military heroism. The bride, who had demanded to know why I was embarrassing her now, found herself completely overshadowed by revelations about her sister's classified service. The tactical intelligence she provided was so precise, so comprehensive, that our extraction team was able to neutralize enemy positions without firing a single shot in anger. The general said his pride in military efficiency evident. Every American soldier walked away from that operation alive and uninjured. Applause began among the military guests, spreading quickly throughout the ballroom as the significance of the rescue became clear. Even civilian attendees understood that 47 saved lives represented an extraordinary achievement that deserved recognition and gratitude. Daniel stepped forward his dress uniform, displaying the ribbons and medals he'd earned during his own military service. Dad Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell didn't just save my life. She saved Jenkins Rodriguez Thompson and 43 other soldiers who had families waiting for them at home. The personal testimonial from someone who had actually been rescued added emotional weight that made the achievement feel immediate and real. Several military spouses wiped away tears as they imagined the relief of families who had received good news instead of devastating notification visits. General Morrison's voice grew stronger as he continued his public recognition. But the most remarkable aspect of this operation was Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell's personal sacrifice. She conducted this mission while recovering from injuries sustained during previous deployments. Medical records show she was technically unfit for field operations. My chest tightened as he revealed details I'd hoped would remain classified. The infected shrapnel wounds from an IED explosion 3 months earlier had left me weakened and in constant pain. Military doctors had recommended medical leave, but the urgency of the rescue operation had overridden their concerns. She spent 3 days crawling through drainage ditches, hiding in abandoned buildings, and observing enemy positions while running a fever from untreated infections. General Morrison continued. Her dedication to mission success nearly cost her own life. The ballroom fell completely silent as guests absorbed the full scope of what they were learning. This wasn't just military efficiency or tactical success. It was personal sacrifice that had put one soldier's life at risk to save dozens of others. Following Operation Silent Thunder, Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action against an enemy force. General Morrison announced. She received the Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat and the Military Intelligence Exceptional Civilian Service Award for her contributions to national security. Each medal represented recognition that contradicted my family's perception of my achievements. While they had assumed I was drifting without purpose, the military had been honoring my service with their highest decorations for courage and effectiveness. But here's what makes this recognition even more meaningful. General Morrison continued his voice, taking on a note of amazement. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell declined all public ceremonies. She refused interviews, photo opportunities, and publicity that could have advanced her military career. She chose anonymity over advancement. The decision to avoid publicity had been practical rather than noble. Intelligence operations required maintaining low profiles that protected both operatives and future missions. Public recognition could compromise security protocols and endanger other soldiers conducting similar operations. This is the first time her family is learning about her extraordinary service. General Morrison concluded, because she valued operational security over personal recognition. She protected classified information even from those closest to her. Stephanie's face crumpled as the full impact of her public humiliation became clear. She had attacked a decorated war hero in front of 300 guests, including military families who understood exactly how inappropriate her behavior had been. My mother, Patricia, pushed through the crowd surrounding our table, tears streaming down her cheeks as she reached for my hands. "Amelia, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't we know?" The pain in her voice reflected years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities for connection. She had judged her daughter harshly while having no knowledge of the actual circumstances that had shaped my post-military life. Stephanie's composure shattered completely as the magnitude of her public mistake became undeniable. Her carefully applied makeup ran in dark streaks down her cheeks, while her elaborate wedding hairstyle began falling apart under the weight of her emotional breakdown. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of conversations throughout the ballroom. "How was I supposed to know you were a war hero? You never told us anything." Her desperate attempt to justify the humiliation fell flat among guests who had witnessed her cruel dismissal of someone they now understood deserved respect and gratitude. Military families particularly seemed disgusted by her treatment of a decorated veteran. My mother Patricia reached our table with trembling hands and tears flowing freely down her face. The elegant composure she'd maintained throughout the wedding reception had dissolved into raw emotion as she confronted the reality of how badly she'd misjudged her own daughter. "Amalia, forgive me," she sobbed, grasping my hands with desperate intensity. "We thought you were throwing your life away. We thought you couldn't handle responsibility or commitment. How could we have been so wrong?" The pain in her voice reflected years of accumulated disappointment and missed opportunities for understanding. Every conversation where she'd expressed frustration with my apparent lack of direction now carried the weight of devastating irony. My father approached more slowly his own military background, helping him process what General Morrison had revealed about my service record. As a retired Army sergeant, he understood the significance of the decorations and operations that had been discussed. "Silver Star recipients are the best of the best," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and shame. "I served 22 years and never came close to that level of recognition. My own daughter surpassed everything I achieved, and I treated her like a disappointment." Extended family members who had spent years avoiding me at gatherings now gathered around our table with expressions of shock and growing guilt. Aunts who had whispered about my failures, uncles who had assumed I lacked work ethic, cousins who had written me off as the family embarrassment suddenly faced evidence that contradicted every assumption they'd made. General Morrison continued his revelations, apparently determined to ensure that my family understood the full scope of what they had failed to recognize. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell didn't just serve one tour in Afghanistan. She completed 3 deployments each involving increasingly dangerous intelligence operations. The detail hit my family like a physical blow. While they had assumed I was avoiding responsibility, I had actually been volunteering for repeated deployments to one of the world's most dangerous combat zones. Her second deployment involved infiltrating Taliban supply networks in Helmand Province. The general continued. Intelligence she gathered disrupted weapons shipments that would have killed dozens of American and Allied forces. My throat tightened as memories of that mission flooded back. 6 weeks of living among Afghan civilians while documenting enemy movements, supply routes, and communication patterns. The constant fear of discovery, the isolation from friendly forces, the weight of knowing that failure would result in both my death and continued threats to American soldiers. During her 3rd deployment, Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell was nearly killed while protecting Afghan civilians from a suicide bomber. General Morrison said, his voice heavy with emotion. She identified the threat and attempted to evacuate a crowded marketplace. The explosion left her with traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures and internal injuries that ended her military career. Stephanie gasped audibly as she learned that my apparent struggles with civilian life had actually been recovery from combat injuries. My family's impatience with my slow progress through college, my difficulty holding demanding jobs, my preference for solitude suddenly took on completely different meaning. The medical discharge process took 18 months. General Morrison continued. During that time, Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell received treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder, underwent multiple surgeries to repair combat injuries, and participated in experimental therapies for traumatic brain injury. My mother's sobbing grew louder as she realized that my family had abandoned me during the most difficult period of my life. Instead of providing support during medical recovery, they had expressed disappointment in what they perceived as my lack of motivation and direction. We read the classified letters. Patricia confessed through her tears. Mail kept arriving addressed to you with official seals and military markings. I thought it was spam or recruitment materials trying to get you to join up. The admission struck me like a physical blow. You read my mail. I threw most of it away, she whispered, her voice breaking with shame. There was one envelope marked presidential citation that I assumed was some kind of recruitment scam. I didn't think you were important enough to receive anything official from Washington. The presidential citation had been recognition for my third deployment, acknowledging the civilian lives saved and the intelligence gathered despite severe personal cost. Learning that my own mother had discarded it without reading the contents felt like losing the honor all over again. Daniel stepped forward, his face flushed with anger at how my family had treated someone he considered a personal hero. Mrs. Hartwell, do you understand what you just told us? You threw away recognition from the President of the United States because you assumed your daughter wasn't worthy of it. The harsh question hung in the air like an accusation that no one could answer adequately. Military guests throughout the ballroom exchanged looks of disgust and disbelief at the family dynamics they were witnessing. General Morrison's expression hardened as he processed what he'd learned about my family's treatment during my recovery period. Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell needed support from loved ones while adapting to civilian life after combat trauma. Instead, she faced criticism and abandonment from the people who should have been her strongest advocates. Stephanie tried once more to deflect responsibility for her behavior, but she never told us she was in the military. How were we supposed to know if she kept everything secret? Classified operations require operational security, General Morrison replied firmly. She couldn't discuss her service without potentially compromising ongoing missions and endangering other operatives. Her silence protected American lives. The explanation highlighted the impossible position I'd been placed in after military service. Protecting classified information meant accepting my family's disappointment rather than revealing achievements that could have restored their respect and support. Several military spouses approached our table, their faces filled with compassion and understanding that my own family had failed to provide. These women understood the challenges of loving someone whose service required sacrifice and secrecy. Ma'am, one colonel's wife said gently, my husband served in intelligence for 15 years. I know how difficult it is to carry that burden alone. Your family should be proud beyond words. The support from strangers who understood military life felt more meaningful than years of civilian relationships that had been built on incomplete information about who I really was and what I had experienced. Standing before 300 wedding guests who now knew more about my military service than my own family had learned in years, I felt the weight of carrying secrets that had shaped every relationship in my civilian life. The moment demanded honesty that would either begin healing or complete the fracture that had divided us for so long. The classified nature of intelligence operations meant that I couldn't share details about my service. I began my voice carrying the composed tone that military training had taught me to maintain under pressure. Protecting operational security was more important than personal recognition or family understanding. My words fell across the silent ballroom like stones into still water, creating ripples of comprehension among military guests who understood the burden of carrying secrets that could endanger others. For 3 years, I conducted operations that required complete anonymity. I continued addressing my family while including the broader audience that had witnessed their public judgment of someone they didn't really know. Revealing my identity or mission details could have compromised ongoing operations and endangered other soldiers. Stephanie stood frozen in her wedding dress, apparently struggling to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the decorated officer being described by witnesses to her courage and sacrifice. When I returned from my final deployment with combat injuries, the transition to civilian life became my new mission. I explained choosing words that conveyed both military experience and personal struggle. Traumatic brain injury meant that simple tasks took enormous effort. Post-traumatic stress made social situations extremely difficult. The admission of vulnerability felt dangerous after years of maintaining privacy about my medical challenges, but the truth needed to be spoken if any healing was going to occur. I attended community college because my brain injury made full-time academic work impossible. I said meeting my mother's tearful gaze directly. I worked part-time jobs because my medical condition prevented me from handling demanding professional responsibilities. Each explanation dismantled another assumption that had contributed to my family's disappointment and eventual abandonment. They had interpreted my limitations as laziness, rather than recognizing them as consequences of military service and sacrifice. The choice to keep my service record private wasn't about hiding from you. I continued, my voice growing stronger as I found words for feelings that had remained buried for years. It was about protecting information that could have gotten other people killed. General Morrison nodded approvingly at my explanation, understanding from his own experience how operational security requirements could strain personal relationships and create impossible choices between duty and family connection. But I need you to understand something important, I said, shifting my tone to address the deeper issues that had damaged our family relationships. When I needed support during the most difficult period of my life, you chose criticism and abandonment over patience and love. The harsh truth needed to be spoken regardless of the public setting and the embarrassment it might cause. Years of accumulated hurt and disappointment demanded acknowledgement before any reconciliation could begin. I was recovering from combat injuries while dealing with the trauma of watching friends die in explosions and firefights. I continued my composure, remaining steady despite the emotional weight of the words. Instead of receiving support from my family, I faced constant judgment about my apparent failures and lack of direction. Patricia's sobbing intensified as she confronted the reality of how her expectations and disappointment had affected someone who was already struggling with invisible wounds that required time and understanding to heal. The day I received my Purple Heart, I was alone in a government office because my family was too disappointed in me to attend a ceremony they knew nothing about. I said, the memory still carrying sharp edges of pain and isolation. The image of military recognition received in solitude, while family members nursed grudges about perceived failures, created a powerful contrast that affected even civilian guests who had no direct military experience. Now General Morrison is offering me a position with defense contractors that would utilize my intelligence experience in civilian consulting work. I continued introducing information that would reshape how my family understood my current prospects and potential. The job offer represented vindication for years of struggle and evidence that my military experience had prepared me for professional success that my family had assumed was beyond my capabilities. Major defense corporations value the analytical skills and security clearances that intelligence officers develop. I explained addressing the broader audience while ensuring that my family understood the significance of opportunities now available to me. Daniel stepped forward with obvious emotion in his voice as he addressed the assembled guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I owe my life to this woman's courage and tactical brilliance. Every day I spend with my new wife is possible because Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell risked everything to bring me home. His testimonial carried weight that no amount of military ribbons or formal recognition could match. Personal gratitude from someone whose life had been directly saved by my actions validated the sacrifices in ways that official ceremonies never could. But what makes this recognition even more meaningful, I continued building toward a revelation that would surprise both my family and the assembled guests, is learning that my work continues serving others through civilian channels. The transition to discussing my current activities felt natural as I prepared to share information that would demonstrate how military values had guided my post-service choices. For the past 18 months, I've been operating a nonprofit organization that provides support services for wounded veterans transitioning to civilian life. I announced watching surprise register on faces throughout the ballroom. The revelation that I had been serving others while my family assumed I was struggling to help myself created another powerful contrast that highlighted how little they knew about my actual activities and priorities. The organization is funded entirely by my military disability payments. I continued ensuring that everyone understood the personal sacrifice involved in choosing to help others rather than focusing solely on my own recovery and advancement. We provide housing assistance job placement services and peer counseling for veterans dealing with combat trauma and physical disabilities. I explained describing work that utilized both my military experience and personal understanding of the challenges facing wounded soldiers. General Morrison's eyes lit up with obvious approval and respect as he learned about my continued commitment to serving others despite my own struggles with recovery and family relationships. 63 veterans have found stable housing and employment through our programs. I said providing concrete evidence of impact that demonstrated both effectiveness and dedication beyond personal gain. The numbers represented lives changed and futures secured through work that had remained invisible to a family that assumed I was failing to achieve anything meaningful or worthwhile. 6 months after Stephanie's wedding, our family gathered for Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' home in Charlottesville, marking the first peaceful holiday celebration we'd shared in years. The dining room displayed photographs that hadn't been there before my military service portrait ceremony pictures and a framed copy of the presidential citation that had been retrieved from military archives after my mother's shameful admission. Stephanie arrived early to help with meal preparation, her demeanor completely transformed from the entitled bride who had publicly humiliated her sister. She'd spent months volunteering at my veteran nonprofit organization, learning about the challenges facing wounded soldiers and developing genuine respect for military service and sacrifice. "I never understood what sacrifice really meant," she said while arranging flowers on the dining table. "Working with your veterans taught me the difference between temporary inconvenience and actual hardship." Her transformation felt genuine rather than performative, built on direct experience with people whose struggles made her own challenges seem manageable by comparison. The work had given her perspective that years of privileged comfort had failed to provide. My mother, Patricia, had undergone her own journey of growth and education. She'd joined military family support groups, attended Gold Star family events, and educated herself about post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. The house now contained books about veteran affairs and military history that reflected her commitment to understanding experiences she'd previously dismissed. "I keep thinking about all the conversations we should have had," she said while checking the turkey's progress. "All the times I could have asked about your experiences instead of making assumptions about your choices." Her regret felt authentic, supported by actions that demonstrated genuine effort to bridge gaps that had formed through years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities for connection. My father had become one of my organization's most effective advocates, using his veteran network to identify soldiers who needed support services and connecting them with our programs. His military experience helped him communicate with wounded veterans in ways that civilian volunteers sometimes struggled to achieve. Daniel and Stephanie's marriage had strengthened considerably since their wedding day revelation. Their relationship now rested on a foundation of military values, including duty, honor, and respect for service and sacrifice. Daniel's gratitude toward me had evolved into genuine family affection that included both sisters in his vision of future relationships. General Morrison had indeed offered me a position with a prestigious defense consulting firm that specialized in threat assessment and security planning for government contractors. The work utilized my intelligence background while providing financial stability that allowed me to expand our veteran services significantly. Professional success felt satisfying in ways that went beyond personal achievement. My military experience had prepared me for civilian responsibilities that matched both my skills and my values, creating career satisfaction that my family had assumed was beyond my reach. The nonprofit organization had grown to serve over 150 veterans across Virginia, with satellite offices planned for North Carolina and Maryland. Federal grants and private donations had supplemented my personal funding, allowing us to hire professional staff and expand our service offerings. During our Thanksgiving meal, I shared stories about recent program successes: a Marine corporal who'd completed college and started teaching high school, a Navy petty officer who'd launched a successful small business, an Army specialist who'd overcome addiction and rebuilt relationships with her children. Each story represented transformation that had been possible because someone understood the unique challenges facing wounded veterans and had resources available to help them succeed in civilian settings. What I've learned through this experience, I said, addressing my family as we shared dessert, is that the greatest battles are often fought in silence, and the greatest victories come from serving others without expecting recognition. The words carried weight, earned through years of classified service, followed by civilian work that had remained invisible to people who should have been my strongest supporters. I spent years carrying secrets that I couldn't share with the people I loved most. I continued acknowledging the difficulty of maintaining operational security while building family relationships. But protecting those secrets meant protecting American lives, including the lives of soldiers' families who never knew their safety depended on operations they'll never hear about. My family listened with attention and respect that had been absent during years of misunderstanding and disappointing assumptions about my capabilities and character. Family love grows strongest when it's built on truth, respect, and genuine care for each other's sacrifices. I concluded articulating lessons learned through both military service and civilian recovery. We can't support each other effectively when we make assumptions instead of asking questions. The observation applied to both military families dealing with classified service and civilian families struggling to understand experiences that fell outside their normal frame of reference. Stephanie reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her eyes bright with tears that reflected genuine emotion rather than performative regret. I'm sorry it took public humiliation for me to learn who my sister really is, but I'm grateful every day that I have the chance to know you now. Her apology felt complete because it was supported by months of changed behavior that demonstrated commitment to building a better relationship based on understanding rather than assumptions. As evening approached and family members prepared to leave, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us from wedding day disaster to genuine reconciliation and mutual respect. The experience had taught all of us important lessons about the danger of making assumptions, the importance of asking questions before passing judgment, and the possibility of healing relationships that had seemed irreparably damaged by misunderstanding and neglect. My work with wounded veterans continued to provide purpose and satisfaction that connected my military experience with civilian service. Helping other soldiers transition successfully to post-military life felt like a natural extension of the missions I'd conducted in uniform. Romance had entered my life through a relationship with Marcus, a former Navy SEAL, who'd found our organization during his own transition to civilian life. Our shared understanding of military culture and combat experience created a foundation for intimacy that had been missing from previous civilian relationships. Marcus understood without explanation why crowded restaurants made me uncomfortable, why I preferred sitting with my back to walls, why sudden loud noises could trigger anxiety responses that had nothing to do with present circumstances. Our relationship developed slowly built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than assumptions or expectations that couldn't account for the complexity of post-military adjustment and recovery. As I drove home through Virginia's countryside, I thought about the strange way life had brought recognition and reconciliation through circumstances I never could have predicted or planned. The wedding day humiliation that had seemed so devastating in the moment had actually created an opportunity for truth that might never have emerged under normal family circumstances. My family's transformation from disappointment to pride felt genuine because it was based on accurate information rather than wishful thinking or temporary emotions that could fade when faced with ongoing challenges. The work ahead included expanding veteran services, building stronger family relationships, and developing a romantic partnership that honored both individual growth and shared commitment to serving others. What started as the worst day of family relationships had become the foundation for connections based on honesty, respect, and genuine understanding of each other's sacrifices and achievements. The greatest lesson learned was that true strength often means serving others even when nobody recognizes your sacrifice, and that family love becomes most meaningful when it's based on truth rather than assumptions or expectations that ignore the complexity of individual experience. Have you ever had to keep important parts of your life secret to protect others, only to have people misunderstand your choices? How do you think families can better support each other when military service or other responsibilities require privacy about personal experiences? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences with family misunderstandings. Thank you for listening to Amalia's story of military service family reconciliation and the power of truth to heal relationships that seemed beyond repair. I hope her journey reminds you that strength often comes in forms we don't expect, and that understanding each other's sacrifices makes family bonds stronger than any temporary misunderstanding. Please subscribe to hear more stories about courage, family healing, and the unexpected ways that truth can transform our most important relationships. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from learning about the challenges facing military families and the importance of supporting each other through difficult transitions.